Oh man, it's been quite some time since we've been here. 1 minute boss guides for Black Rook Hold. Let's take a walk. Starting with the Amalgam of Souls. Tanks, you're going to want to face this amalgamation away from your group. The main tank mechanic here is Soul Reap, a large 180-degree frontal. This can be avoided, so tanks just be sure to react to this mechanic. DPS and healers are going to need to keep an eye out for the swirling sights since it's quite difficult to see. Any player struck will be knocked back and take a moderate amount of physical damage. Lastly, the amalgam will target a player with soul echoes, which will cause the player to periodically leave behind soul echoes, which will deal damage to any nearby players and will cause them to flee in fear for 5 seconds. Melee players should move away from the boss and then back towards, making a small circular motion. Range will want to move towards the edge of the encounter space to avoid hitting anyone else. Periodically, the Amalgam of Souls will position itself near the center of the room and begin casting Call Souls. This will spawn adds near the edge of the encounter space that will slowly move towards the boss. Players should attempt to defeat as many of these souls as possible, since each one that reaches the boss will increase the damage of the soul burst by 30%, stacking. I should mention that some CCs do work to prevent the souls from moving, like stuns, but other type of CCs will have no effect. So make sure you're banking some damage for this phase. Following this intermission, the boss will erupt in a soul burst, dealing a large amount of AoE damage to your entire group. Healers just keep an eye out for this. And outside of that, it's just a simple rinse and repeat. Illysanna is a 2-phase encounter, and during this fight, players will have to deal with 3 main mechanics. First, tanks should be aware of Vengeful Shear, which is just a pretty heavy tank buster. Illysanna will also then target a player with Brutal Glaive, which will apply a really nasty bleed for 30 seconds. This player should move out and away from the group to prevent it from hitting any additional allies. Allies, you fucking... This player needs to move out and away from the group to prevent hitting any other additional players, and then the healer should spot heal this player over the duration of the dot. Lastly, during the first phase, she will target 3 random players with Dark Rush, which will cause Illysanna to dash to each one of the 3 targeted players, leaving a trail in her wake. The name of the game is to maximize floor space here, so targeted players should aim to bait the rush near the edge of the room and near each other. When Illysanna jumps away, this is the indicator for phase 2. This will spawn 2 adds, Arisen Vanguard and Arcanist. Tanks be sure to establish threat, and DPS should nuke away. During this phase, Illysanna will target a player with eye beams, which will follow the player leaving behind a fell blaze ground. Ideally, the targeted player will try to contain this to a specific out-of-the-way area of the encounter space. Eventually, Illysanna will return back to the platform, beginning phase 1 over again, and you're basically just going to repeat this until Illysanna falls. Smashspite is quite straightforward. Tanks, just be aware of the Brutal Haymaker ability. This will deal a large amount of physical damage and cause the tank to take 75% more physical damage for 15 seconds. Periodically, Smashspite will also target a player with Hateful Gaze. This will deal moderate physical damage and knock the player backwards, and will cause the player to take 500% more damage from the next Hateful charge for 1 minute. This means you're never going to want to take more than 2 of these in a row. If you notice that a player who is being targeted has the debuff already, someone will want to step and intercept the charge before it hits the player. The name of the game is to rotate between 3 to 4 players. Occasionally, Smashspite will also cast Earthshaking Stomp, knocking players back. Lastly, it's worth mentioning that Fellbats throughout the encounter space will spit Fell Vomit at players. This should just be avoided whenever possible, and the frequency of this occurring will actually increase as the encounter continues. Last but not least, we have Lord Ravencrest himself. Upon pulling Ravencrest, Latosius, is that Latosius? I don't know how to say that. Will teleport outside of the arena. He will randomly cast Shadow Bolts at players, and healers just want to make sure that they're spot healing this damage. Tanks need to be aware of the Unearing Shear, a stacking tank bleed that is permanent. Make sure that you're doing everything in your power to mitigate this damage up front, and the dot that is being applied. Occasionally, Ravencrest will also cast a Whirling Blade at a player. This will continuously bounce around the arena, so players want to make sure that they're avoiding this. Periodically, Latosius will also cast Dark Blast. This is a large frontal that should be avoided. Once Ravencrest hits 10% health, Latosius will actually stun him, and phase 2 will begin. Plot twist, this Nipple Twister is actually a Dreadlord. During this part of the phase, Dantoloniax will cast Shadowbolt Volley. This just does massive group damage, so healer, be ready for it. Luckily, once you do phase, your party will be blessed with the legacy of Lord Ravencrest, increasing your damage, healing, and health. The goal is just to survive the first volley. During phase 2, he will also cast Stinging Swarm, which will spawn an add on a player. This will constantly stun its target, so DPS should swap to this immediately to help out their ally. Also, keep an eye out for the Cloud of Hypnosis. This will put any player to sleep who accidentally stumbles into it. Last but not least, Dantoloniax will use Dreadlord's Guile, which will cause the arena to erupt in Dark Obliteration cast, causing a series of lines to spawn. Just don't get hit. This fight ends as soon as Dantoloniax is defeated. I hope this helped. Big shout out to all my Patreon supporters who make these types of videos possible. Best of luck, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.